Gordon Hayward had himself a career year this season as his scoring, efficiency, as well as defensive game really peaked up for a Utah Jazz team that may have been injury-riddled but still won 51 games. But there's a lot of belief going into his free agency that he could join Isaiah Thomas, his former head coach Brad Stevens, and the Boston Celtics. We're going to talk about this, but first, we have to talk about Gordon Hayward himself. I think he's really benefited from just gaining a lot of strength. I mean, for a while, I think the guy was a perimeter-oriented player, and while the majority of his work still comes from that area, he also gets to the free throw line about 6 times a game. He's not afraid to draw contact and actually finish through it with where he is in his career right now. His creating abilities, whether it be one-on-one situations, he can beat guys off the dribble, but his three-point shot was just below 40% this season as well. So he's a very versatile player, pretty much all ways offensively, whether it be playing off ball, moving across screens, cutting to the rim, or if he can pull up for a jumper himself. So he's a really versatile offensive player as he averaged about 22 points this season. But defensively, he's also taken some strides. He was already a good defensive player given his height and decent athleticism, but he's gotten a lot stronger, man. You can't just run through him anymore, which you may have been able to do a few seasons ago. And so now we have to talk about the Boston Celtics, because of course this is the team that is thought of as one of the main destinations that Hayward could go to. First and foremost, they should have the cap space. It would cost about $30 million to sign Gordon Hayward this season to pair him up with Isaiah Thomas. They would have to allow pretty much all of their free agents to go. And given that the names are like Amir Johnson, Kelly Olynyk, I would be totally fine with them letting those guys go for Gordon Hayward. If we can look at the team itself, I mean, Avery Bradley is making strides with his offensive game. Solid 15, 16-point scorer. Al Horford is just one of the more versatile dudes in the NBA on both sides of the floor. And the offensive improvement that he made this season for them, mainly with his playmaking, could have Gordon Hayward right at home. Now, Jay Crowder is interesting because he and Hayward play the same position. They're both small forwards. But I do think Crowder, given his strength and physicality, as well as being a strong defender, I think he could slide down to the small ball 4 and be pretty okay. Marcus Smart is still able to find ways to impact the game with his playmaking and defense, even if he's not a good shooter, besides the one Ray Allen impersonation he had against the Cavs in these playoffs. I mentioned Kelly Olynyk. There's a chance that he will be gone from this team. They might miss his scoring off the bench, but I don't think it's going to be the worst thing in the world. So it's definitely a damn good situation that Hayward could be entering into. Now, it should be said the situation he has in Utah is pretty strong as well. Rudy Gobert could end up being the best center in the NBA, just based on the trajectory that he's on. But for the sake of this video, we're just going to be talking about Gordon Hayward if he joined the Celtics. So, we're going to see in a minute here, how does Hayward's improvements to his scoring, and while his playmaking has been a bit down as his career has gone on, his playmaking is still a thing. How does that all fit in with the Celtics? Well, immediately, I think he would be playing the small forward position, which we'll talk about what that does for Jay Crowder in a second. Like I mentioned, I think Crowder is perfectly fine with playing the power forward spot. I say this because there isn't really another real power forward on the roster besides Amir Johnson, and you're going to have to let him go, and that's totally fine. So, the Celtics would be running a kind of smaller team, but I think it could be a team that's really difficult to deal with just because of all the talent. I mean, Al Horford is still there at the center spot. And if we just talk about Hayward, immediately I expect him to have the ball in his hands more often than every starter except for Isaiah Thomas. I could see him at times really running the Celtics offense, being either a pick and roll guy or someone who's leading Brad Stevens' system, being the initial ball handler, making the pass off to the guy who's supposed to score, just being like a really key part of everything they can do offensively. And I think it could take a lot of pressure off of Isaiah Thomas. I mean, they already use Isaiah in off-ball situations, and I think that, on top of Al Horford and then just Thomas being awesome, were big reasons why he really stepped up this season. Now, of course, he's still going to have his moments with the ball in his hands, attacking and pulling up for threes and getting screens from big dudes. But I think his job will be just a little bit easier because Hayward's going to be there to take up some of the offensive slack. This also would allow Avery Bradley to finally be like a third option, which is what he's meant to be. For the Celtics, he's had to be like the number 2 scorer. This allows Jay Crowder's offense to not be as important because he's kind of one-dimensional. He's a spot shooter a lot of the time. But of course, I expect the sets that they would run under Brad Stevens' offense to be really difficult to defend for a lot of teams, because now you're looking at Isaiah, who can create, Hayward can do stuff, Bradley. I wouldn't have him lead my offense, but I would definitely have him be a part of it in like a ball handling role or being a guy who can just do stuff. There's just a lot of guys who can do things, is the best way to put it. And then you add on top of that Markelle Fultz, who's probably going to be the number 1 overall pick. He'll be coming off the bench, and yeah, there's valid questions about how much impact he could have in his rookie season, but that's just another guy who could just do a lot of things offensively for you. But of course, there are 2 sides of the ball. We got to talk about defense. Bradley is still one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA today. He's the guy who will be defending the primary ball handler for a lot of teams, or the point guard. Jay Crowder, strong wing defender. He can defend shooting guards through some power forwards. So, I mean, they've already had that going for him. But then Hayward, like I mentioned, dude's pretty good on defense. He's really improved in that area. He was always like a nice defensive player, but like I mentioned, the strength really helps him out. Yes, that's Jason Tatum in the footage. No, I don't think Miami would draft him or even have the opportunity to. And then you also have Al Horford, who's still a pretty good defensive player around the basket. And I think through Avery Bradley, Gordon Hayward, Al Horford, as well as Jay Crowder, that's a lot of switch potential in that Celtics defense. You're still going to be making up for the fact that Isaiah Thomas sucks on defense, but, I mean, you'd have kind of like a Golden State Warriors-esque thing going on. But of course, there's still going to be some problems. Number 1, team's still going to suck when it comes to rebounding. It'll be a small team. Al Horford will be your center, the main guy, contesting other big men for rebounds, and, I mean, we know what's going to happen in that department. And if you're moving Jay Crowder to the 4 spot, I mean, Crowder's a cool rebounder for a wing, but at the power forward position, you're still going to be liable to give up a lot of offensive boards. I also mentioned Isaiah Thomas's defense. He's still going to be bad defensively, no matter how many good defensive players you surround him with. He's still going to be liable to be attacked by smart NBA offenses. And also, you're still not beating the Cleveland Cavaliers even with Gordon Hayward. I think people might get really excited if the Celtics signed Hayward, and they might get a little too antsy and go, he's the guy who can put them over the top against Cleveland. He's not doing that. And I would hope everyone realizes that Hayward is not that caliber of player. Now, if crazier things have happened, maybe he could elevate himself to that, but I highly doubt that happens. But he could definitely be like the next stepping stone for the Celtics, hopefully, eventually, taking over the Eastern Conference from LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Anyway, I think the positive far outweighs the negative with Gordon Hayward. There really isn't any negative, it's just they wouldn't be as good against Cleveland. Actually, that's a total lie. They would still suck on the boards and whatever else I just said. Hayward would be awesome for the Celtics, and that's pretty much it.